Alright, good morning, good people, and good morning folks online. We're kicking off this week, which is, the emphasis is going to be on giving, but before we do that, we're going to circle back and talk about this past week, which was on serving. And so on day 21 last week, the exercise was find a way to put someone else's needs before yours. Anybody have any success stories? Anybody online? Hopefully you had some success stories that you can share at some point in time. You can comment on the link after you watch the video for this message today. I did that last week one day. My daughter asked me if I would, she had people painting the outside of her house, and we had a really full day, but she asked me if I would be willing to go check on the painters. So after talking to my wife, I realized that I needed to put somebody else's needs ahead of my own. And I drove up to Little Rock and checked on them and had to tell them a few things that they weren't planning on doing the right way. And I felt good about that, and it was the right thing to do. On day 22, it was serve somebody that cannot help serve you back. Do something for someone that cannot do something back for you. And does anybody have an example there?
Yeah, we took or started a collection at CR, the faculty has, to take to the women's shelter. To take to help the ladies at the women's shelter, because the thrift store is not doing good because of COVID,
right.
And also we're going to start. They're going to start having a silent auction, and we're trying to gather up some really nice stuff.
Oh, that's nice.
Put in a silent auction, online auction,
Yeah.
to where we can, raise a little money for women, for the battered women and children.
Are you still gathering stuff?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'll have to look for something. I was at Lowe's the day of this lesson, and there was a guy in front of me that he was telling me he was saying he's disabled. He bought some drywall and he's going to need help loading up. And she said, "I'm sorry, there's nobody available right now." And she said, "If I have to get a manager." And he said, "Well, you'll have to get a manager because I can't do this by myself." Oh, after he checked out, I said, "Man, I'll help you. I'll come out and help you." He couldn't help me back because he's disabled, and I felt good about that. He thanked me. Day 23, do something for a neighbor. Show them you care with no strings attached. Day 24, serve a child who is in your life today. I wrote down a couple things I could do, but I didn't do either one of them. I'm just being honest with you. But the point is that that series last week really made me start thinking about what I do on a daily basis, and do I really do the things that are put in my path, or do I kind of ignore them a little bit? Day 25 was, if you know someone that's sick, visit that person. Encourage, support, or call them. If you can't do that, send a gift. We had planned to do that, and we found out right before we did it that the person had passed away. But we should always be doing that, right? We should always be checking on people that are sick. We do check on the homebound. The deacons have a homebound list, and they check on the widows and homebound people every month. So we all have certain people that we're assigned to, and that's exactly what we're supposed to do as Christians. So any other thoughts from last week? Anybody else? I think the last one was serve God in one of the following ways. Organize an event. You just talked about that. Volunteer at the food pantry or soup kitchen. Clean a neighbor's yard. Visit an old person. So next Sunday we can all visit Keith on his birthday because he's older next Sunday.
I do that every day at my house.
Who'd he say? Keith. Who was that?
I don't know, Bull.
Alright, serving. It was a really good. It was really good emphasis last week. So this week
Giving.
it's on giving. So to start this off just a little bit, do you think that you know who tithes and who doesn't tithe? Can we tell who gives and who doesn't give?
No.
You know,
Do we think that all church members walk the walk when it comes to tithing?
No.
Doubt it.
Do any of you have an example of somebody that in your childhood or growing up, your parents or grandparents were good examples of tithing? What's your mom do every time she gets her Social Security check?
She writes her check to the church every time.
Yeah, first thing she does, writes her tithe out to the church.
my grandfather was like that, you know, like, you know, he was a farmer. And when at the end of the crops, you know, when he sat down and balanced his books, he said the church comes off first, you know, out of the profit, you know, or when he balanced his books, it's the church, then creditors, you know, da-da-da, you know, but he emphasized that to me and my brother, you know, that.
Right. First fruits.
Mhm.
You know, and that's what Abel was looked at favorably for giving one of the very first stories in the Bible. Anyone else?
When we got our allowance when I was a kid, my mom taught us to separate out 10% went to church, 10 or 20% went in savings, and then you could have the rest. And we each all had a little savings account at the savings and loan that you walked over and put your money in.
Uh-huh.
That's cool.
There's not enough of that talk these days.
No, I mean, we only got like $1, but you know, it was 10 cents,
Right.
you took to church, or a quarter you took to church.
But what you guys are all talking about, it really sticks with you throughout your life. You know, my dad and mom growing up, we didn't have a lot as kids, but I can remember every Sunday my dad putting his check in the offering plate, and he was really consistent. And sometimes, being a contractor, you don't always get paid on time, right? And I have a lot of, well, Mary Ann and I have a lot of stories of our needs being met, and we've always felt like part of that is because we try to be faithful. We're not always as faithful as we should be, but we try to be. And my mom tells a story about one time she had a bill to pay, and she had no idea where the money was going to come from. And she kept getting on my dad about it, and my dad finally said to my mom, "The Lord's going to take care of it." And that day, the knock on the door. And my mom said that the guy standing outside the door, she has no idea who he is, but he hands her a check and says, "I know you don't know who I am, but your husband did a job for me about 3 or 4 years ago, and I never finished paying him, and I've not felt right about it. So here's what I owe him." And she said it was almost to within the penny of what their bill they had to do was, you know. And we've got a lot of stories like that too, that faithfulness. We already talked about on February 20th, Saturday night, Kyle Reno is going to be here. The 21st, on Sunday morning, he's going to be back, and he's a really talented speaker. He's been here before, and we're going to have a prayer emphasis on Sunday night. So, a little time out here, and this is totally unrelated to the lesson. But do you feel the Holy Spirit is trying to break through in our community? So I'm going to give you a couple things that I've heard about this week. We have a classmate that's not with us. Him and his wife are not coming for a little while. And the reason is that his dad has never been in church a single Sunday in his life. And his dad said he wanted to go to church. I don't know the name of the church where Matt Mosler.
New life.
Yeah.
But this guy golfed with Matt Mosler one time, so he wanted to go to Matt's church. And he's been to church now 3 Sundays in a row after never been churched in his entire life. So the couple that's not in class has been going with him. He's
Good.
like, man, I gotta get my dad saved.
Yes.
My mom's saved. I gotta get my dad saved. We miss you guys. We'll be back. I heard of another example this week. Out of the blue, another one of our classmates got a phone call from someone asking for help starting some, I guess, like evangelistic services. And this person is nobody that I would have ever considered to be reaching out, asking for help, doing that. But he's got a band, and he's gotten saved, and he's on fire for the Lord, and he's starting stuff in the community. And I was like, we need to really be in tune to that. I think God's doing some good things among us. We don't always see it. But that's kind of what we're talking about in this study, right? Is how do we reach out through serving and giving and being in a relationship with God, being more focused about it. And we've been praying as a church for revival for a long time. Back to the lesson. So, when you talk about giving, what comes to mind for you? What kind of emotions come to mind for you? What do you think about when you talk about when somebody in the church says, maybe you hear a lesson or a sermon on giving or faithfulness? What comes to mind?
I think of things like the food pantry, Hope Crisis Center, Samaritan's Purse.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, think about, the Lunsfords and also about Lunsfords and Jennifer Jason.
Mm-hmm.
They're giving so much more.
Mm-hmm.
I think about these missionaries that are down give. I'm not giving near what they're giving. They're giving 100%.
Sacrificial lifestyle.
Yeah, so surely I can give my little 10%.
Well, it's not just financial, it's giving of yourself.
Yeah, their
to
time.
serve others.
Yeah, their talent.
To me, that's just as important
It is.
when you can,
These are all good things. What might some other people think about when you're sitting in the service and might think?
I got an old uncle that started squirming,
Yeah.
because, $1 a Sunday was plenty.
Yeah. Maybe stepping on some toes, right?
Yeah.
Maybe they feel like it's my money. Or maybe they feel like, why do they talk about this all the time? They talk about money all the time. In reality, it takes money to run a church and reach out to the community, right? In our church, I don't know, 10% goes to the cooperative program, and that's just that piece of it. So it's more than that. Sometimes people think, well, I'm not going to give them my money because they're just going to waste it. And we're going to talk some more about this, but I think we're going to be in Mark 12 and Acts chapter 2 today. And let's see if we can get this video kicked off.
Giving isn't just about money.
It's time.
It's time, and most people give money because they don't want to give time.
Mm-hmm.
So today we are at the Springs, and the Springs remind me of giving, which is our fourth principle in the Red Letter Challenge of the things that Jesus invites his followers to practice. Jesus actually talks more about money and giving than any of the other principles, and so it's an extremely important topic that we have to discuss. But when we talk about money, especially as Christians, there's real hesitation when it comes to money. And there's many reasons why, but I think there's two main reasons. And the first reason is that some of us have given our hard-earned dollars and seen those dollars misused or abused. I was watching a show on an airplane flying back once and just stumbled upon this show about the lavish lifestyle of these mega church preachers. So think luxury in the Lord, think Bentleys and Bibles. And for whatever reason, it just did not sit well with me. There was something inside of me that says, this isn't right. And if I knew my money was going to something like this, or a person like this, or an organization or ministry like this, I don't know that I would want to give either. But the second main reason that I think we struggle with money and giving and even talking about it is because money's an idol for us. It's probably the biggest idol we have in our lives. And it's tough to talk about something that's so personal, that's such a part of our life. But the more I read through the words of Jesus, if you read all of his words and you see the frequency of which he talks about this, man, I am convinced it is impossible to be a stingy Christian. And there's a lot of areas where Christians like to take real firm black and white stances on areas that I think are gray. Giving is one of those areas I think a lot of people think is gray, that actually, if you look at the words of Jesus, is kind of a black and white issue. It is impossible to be a stingy Christian. And to live the life that Jesus is calling us to live, we are a generous people. And so I want to move you to generosity. So earlier I mentioned that the springs remind me of giving. And we're at Wekiva Springs today in Florida. And what I love about the springs is how crystal clear the water is when the sun is shining. It's beautiful. The springs are refreshing. And it's just amazing. And that's because the water is constantly moving. That's what makes it so clear and beautiful. In Florida, we also have a lot of swamps, and swamps are the opposite of springs. Swamps are bacteria infested, they're nasty, they smell bad, and that's because the water is stagnant. It's not moving at all. And when it comes to a life of giving, what Jesus invites us to is a life of giving that far more depicts a spring than it does a swamp. But I think our culture naturally, we're inclined to live lives that are more resemble a swamp, that we become tight-fisted, and the more money that we have, the more accumulation that we have, we actually become greedier. We don't become any more generous. In fact, statistics tell you that the more money a person makes, the less percentage they give away. And that's extremely sad. What Jesus invites us to is a life of generosity, a life where we can actually give away money. And the cool thing about it is that when we give away our money, it goes places and it does things that we cannot do ourselves. And I believe that every move of God was started by at least one person, if not a group of people, being generous. If we truly want to see God do great things and change the picture we give of who Jesus is, then we must become a generous people. We must give far more like springs than swamps. So all through college and seminary, I kind of fell into a business where I was selling golf head covers. And it actually became a pretty profitable business for my wife and I, and so much so that we were selling 300 head covers a week, which was nuts. And we always had this dream of planting a church and growing God's kingdom that way. And all of a sudden, this very profitable business comes along. And so we really wrestled, especially at seminary as we got closer to finishing with the master's degree, of what do we want to do? Do we want to keep the business and just do really well and save up and then one day plant a church? Or do we want to plant a church now and give up the business? And actually, it worked out that God allowed us to do a bivocational ministry where, in other words, we had income from the business that would support us while we planted a church. And so it turned out to be a really cool thing, but it was super confusing at the time, I remember. And I don't advise you to do this, by the way, but it's one of the few times in life where I've made a deal with God. I said, okay, God, if you want me to keep this business and plant a church, then I want you to use my business of selling golf head covers. You know the little covers that go over the woods? That business. I want you to use that business to grow your kingdom. And I had no idea how God would do it. So we started meeting in home groups and planting this church in Mount Dora, Florida called The Cross. And we bought a little space that we were going to renovate to worship. And about a couple months away from worshiping together, there was a gentleman that emailed me and said, out of everybody in the world, you've got the only head cover I'm looking for. I remember it was a Cleveland Launcher 15-degree 3-wood head cover. And so I'd love to come pick it up from you. And so I didn't normally do pickups, but for whatever reason, my spirit was telling me, yeah, just have him meet you at the church and you can do it there and it'll be great. And so that's what happened. And he came and he saw we were a new church and he was interested, and so much so that he started coming to the church. And then about 2 months after we started worship, he took me out to lunch and he said, we love what God is doing here at the Cross and we'd love to help get the word out. You're a new church, and my wife and I would love to buy billboards for the church and put them all over town and let people know that the Cross is here. And so I said, man, that's amazing. How cool is that? And so for almost 6 years, we've had billboards in our community up that have been pointing people to come to our church. And what's most important about that is at the church, we point them to Jesus. And as I was reflecting back about this, I was thinking a couple things. Number one, how amazing is it that God actually answered my prayer, that He could turn selling golf head covers into growing His kingdom? But number two, and I remember talking with him a while ago, I said, how amazing is it that you have brought so many people into this church through your billboards? And we know that because we get Connect cards every single week, and at least one every week has a little click mark by how'd you hear about us? It's billboards. And so I said to him, your money is going places and doing things that you never thought possible. And you won't even know this side of heaven how much you've impacted God's kingdom. And I think that's true whenever we're generous, whether it's billboards or something else. When we give money to grow God's kingdom, we don't know all that God is up to. But I believe He does powerful things, and He uses your dollars and your generosity, your faith-filled gifts, to truly bless and grow His kingdom. And so God invites you into a life of generosity. Jesus invites you to be not closed fist, but open-handed. He invites you to live a life much more like a spring than a swamp, where your money goes places and it does things. After all, it was Jesus that said, it's far more blessed to give than to receive. I hope that as we've spent a week serving using our hands and feet last week, that now we'll match that with our dollars. I hope that we don't stop short of what Jesus is asking us to do. And I believe that as we become generous, we will change the picture we give of who Jesus is.
Anything jump out?
I like his analogy of the spring and the swamp. That was a good analogy, because if you just sit on it, it just stagnates. You're not moving God's will or word.
Anything else? No comment about the Cleveland 3-iron, 3-wood? 15-degree 3-wood?
Will, have you got one of those?
Yeah, I don't have a Cleveland one, no. It's pretty cool, though. It's a good way to make a living, I guess.
Let's just jump in a little bit. I've enjoyed the videos. Is there such a thing as a stingy Christian? I think we already
Yes.
talked about that, right? Jim gives us notes every week, and in his notes, he told us that his very first position as in ministry, he was the education and finance manager of a church. So he was in charge of, the Sunday school, what they were going through their lesson plan. But he also had to enter all the giving for every member in the church. So he knew who gave and who didn't give. And he knew that even some deacons didn't give a dime. That has to affect your ministry, but that's what we're talking about here. We've done some years ago in this church. We published some data that showed how much money some folks gave. No names, but here's who was in this bracket, who was in this bracket, and it was like 50% of the church was maybe less than $100 a year. If you can't give, that's fine. But if you can and you don't, that's what we're talking about. So what are some ways that today, when you're out in the public, that people display their faith? What are some ways that you know somebody's a Christian as you're out walking around, driving around at your job?
The way they talk.
Yeah.
The way they talk.
Exactly. The way they act.
The way they talk and act. Think outside the box a little bit. Jewelry. Cross on the neck.
That doesn't mean they're a Christian.
What about the little fish symbol on the back of the car?
Oh,
I
yeah.
seen one the other day that had Darwin on the inside of the fish. I didn't
Yeah.
understand what that meant.
I've seen them too, or with feet, a fish with feet on them,
I don't get that.
That's the whole Darwin thing.
Darwinism,
Yeah.
that the world is
Yeah.
in place because of Darwin. Darwin theory.
Some people have, this is contrary to what I've been taught, but some people have a little fish tattooed on them, or WWJD, what would Jesus do, or stuff like that. How about Facebook? I don't have a Facebook account, but is there a way to tell somebody's a Christian they have in their profile maybe? Is there such a thing as a Facebook profile? Probably is.
Well, a lot of it's what they've got posted too.
Yeah, what they say.
What do they post?
I think you could,
I am on Twitter, and Twitter profiles quite often, you tell I'm a man of faith. People wear T-shirts. You just see signs around town about faith, and or even see signs that say "We stand with Israel," stuff like that. But these are all good examples, right? So, with those things that you see, are they inspiring to you, or are they annoying to you?
More or less, yeah, more or less neutral, really.
Yeah.
You know, being a Christian, they're kind of neutral. You know, every now and then I'm surprised that someone, you know, is, oh, I didn't know that you claimed to be a Christian.
Right. And somebody actually said here earlier that it doesn't really mean just because they wear, because they wear the symbol and they got the T-shirt, that doesn't really mean that
Yeah.
they're sincere.
Now, I have seen one thing that I've had, I won't say problems, but I've had to have chats with certain students and let them know, there's certain words that you're not going to say in my presence, and all, and that they, and tell them, say, I'm a Christian. I'm not going to listen to you talk like that. And then on the other hand, I've had to tell them, look, because I don't equate kindness, Christian kindness, with weakness.
That's a good one.
Yeah, I'm soft talk. I don't cuss and yell at you, but don't think that I'm weak.
Right.
I'm treating you with respect. But there's certain words that, because I mean, you get it frustrated working in electrical and mechanical out in the shop, welding. But there's certain words that I'm not going to put up with.
Right.
And they figure that out pretty quick.
Right. So Jesus warned us, don't always trust outward expressions, right? So I think you have, is it Mark? Did I tell you Mark or Matthew?
Mark.
Mark chapter 12, verses 38 through 40. Can you read those, please? Mark 12, 38 through 40. Oh, while you're looking for that, just a little funny story about this. I wrote down Matthew, even though I knew it was Mark, and I went to Matthew, and I'm reading these verses, and I'm thinking, man, I don't know where Jim's getting this. This is I gotta really stretch this to make this work in a lesson. And I realized I was in the wrong book of the Bible, so go ahead.
Mark 12:38, as he taught, Jesus said, "Watch out for the teachers of the law. They like to walk around in flowing robes and be greeted with respect in the marketplaces, and have the most important seats in the synagogues and in the places of honor at banquets. They devour widows' houses for a show, make lengthy prayers. These men will be punished most severely."
Thank you. So what Jesus is talking about is true spirituality versus show spirituality, if you will, right? So, do we still have people that practice show spirituality today? Sure. Of course we do, right? Of course we do. So these guys were walking around, and Jesus warns them. He says, they walk around in white robes. They like to be recognized and greeted in public. They have the title. They sit in the most important seats. They're going to be the ones that sit where they can be visibly seen. They're going to be trying to sit at the right hand at banquets, which is the position of honor and favor, right? And all these things just for show. Remember the conversation that James and John had with Jesus about who's going to be sitting at my right hand, and Jesus scolded them for having that conversation at all. So what we're talking about is this attitude of superiority, and I think we all know people like this, right? We had a family that went to this church that it didn't seem to matter what you said spiritually, this person made you feel like they were just a little bit better than you. And I think that's exactly what Jesus is trying to get to here, right? He talks about that he admonishes them for their long prayers. They're long-winded, he warned against it, and the thought process is from scholars that they were doing all this to overshadow the treacherous behavior that the way they were treating the widows. They were taking advantage of the widows back then. So the question is, how do you tell if someone's faith is genuine?
You have to go by their actions, and you can't make, it's a shame you can't take someone at their word anymore. That's a real shame. You may have to ask you, I'd have to, Delbert, do you know Bull? Is he really a good guy? Can I buy this car from him? Can I hire him to do my lawn? Would he do a good job? You know,
Right.
instead of saying, you know, well, he's a Christian, he's in church every Sunday, so I'm gonna give the job to him.
How many times do we use the same, well, they go to First Baptist Church, you know?
Good point.
And sometimes that's in a negative connotation, right, too. Well, I'm
Yeah.
just like that person, and they go to First Baptist Church, so I guess I don't need to walk through those doors. It's really hard, but, I mean, faith, works are evidence of faith. We don't want works to be done so you get noticed, we want works to be an outflowing of the Holy Spirit within you. Do you still have that Mark chapter 12? Can you read 41 through 44? Mark 12, 41 through 44.
Well, do you have that?
You want me to read it?
No, I got,
Either one of you?
I'll
no,
read
I got the chapter Acts.
He's got to act. Go ahead.
Jesus sat down opposite the place where the offerings were put and watched the crowd putting their money into the temple treasury. Many rich people threw in large sums, but the poor widow came in and put 2 very small copper coins worth only a few cents. Calling his disciples to him, Jesus said, "Truly I tell you, the poor widow has put more into the treasury than all the others. They gave out all of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in everything, all she had to live on."
We all know this story, and we're probably gonna have to speed it up a little bit going through the content, but the treasury was in the court of women, so the court of Gentiles, court of women, and that's where the treasury was, and it was these like horn-shaped brass instruments that if you walked over there, you put your money in there, you knew, cause the money was gold, silver, whatever, copper, right? It was metal on metal, you could hear the coins in there. So some people would actually make sure they had a whole bunch of coins, instead of having bigger denomination coins, so listen to all that money that person's putting in there, right? The thing, and Jesus and the disciples are watching this going on, and this is another teaching moment for the disciples from Jesus, and he's like, that woman right there, the woman, the widow, she gave an insignificant amount of money, right? It was like an hour or two wages, but what the thing was about her, that is, that was all she had, right? So she was truly giving sacrificially. She was giving to the point where for her next meal, she was gonna have to trust God how she was gonna eat her next meal. We talked about this earlier with the missionaries, right? What's the thing they do? When they enter the international mission field, most of them sell almost all their belongings, pay off all their debt, so they don't have any strings attached to them, but when you go over there, you're dependent upon the Lord, right? And God bless them. I wondered personally, I mean, it's not tooting, but it's kind of like, could be where the expression toot your own horn comes from, right? When you're dropping all these coins in the horn. I'm sure that's not it, but
that's what they were doing.
right. Jesus says that we should give with the right attitude. This is in Matthew 6, 2 through 4. We're not going to read it, but you should give quietly, not for show, with the right attitude, not expecting something back. Mary Ann and I had a conversation with some folks in the church one time that gave a bunch of money to sponsor something, and they were upset that the money wasn't used exactly the way that they thought it was gonna be used. I was like, well, look, did you give it or did you loan it?
Yeah.
Are you expecting to get it back, or did you give it to God? You know, you gave it, it's in God's hands. Let the people that minister to the people decide how best to use it. And another really good example is the story of Theodore Roosevelt. Came from a family of extreme wealth, but yet throughout his lifetime, he liked to instill in other people, and especially his children, to be a servant and to help others. And an example was he threw a great feast, invited all his wealthy friends. When they finally opened the doors to the banquet hall, every seat at the table was full of a crippled or disfigured child. And he said to them, he said, I did not bring you here to feed you. I brought you here so you could feed them. And one of his guests was so moved, Charlotte Augusta Gibbs, who was the wife of John Jacob Astor, one of the wealthiest men that ever lived, was so moved that they collected enough money that night to start the New York Orthopedic Hospital for Children. And by the way, this guy was the father of Teddy Roosevelt. Anybody know him? So, that's your trivia for the day. How do we decide where to give? I was thinking about the things I've gotten in the mail in the last couple of weeks. I've gotten something from Arkansas Food Bank, the Salvation Army, Samaritan's Purse, Hope of the Delta. All these are good causes, and we have our own church. How do you decide what you do with your resources? Dave Ramsey, the Financial Peace University guy, says on Dean, we should all be debt-free as Christians. And why is that? Because of his statement, so you can live and give like no one else. If you don't have debt in your life, you have a lot of freedom to help other people. When God stirs in a body of believers, it stirs generosity within us. And there's another example. We're not going to have time to go through it. It's in Acts 2 that talks about the early church, and people were, remember when they were all praying in the room and it shook and they all got a flame and the Holy Spirit came into them. And from that, thousands of people were saved, and they all lived in harmony. If somebody had a need, they sold their possessions to help the other person in need. And it's not to say that we all should sell everything we own. It's just to say that we should be generous, because in reality, it's not ours. We're stewards of it, right? It's already His. It's not ours. So this week, it's amazing how God works. I'm going to share the story for the folks online too. A person that I've become acquainted with in the last few months, I'm going to call him Ted, but that's not his real name. Really had some struggles lately. And this person last week was not rich by any means, but is trying hard to run a business. Was in his car, ready to leave his business for the day. All his money, wallet, everything's in the car. They go back inside, but leave an older child and a younger child in the car. They left the car too to go inside without him knowing. When they walked back outside, somebody was driving away with his car.
Whoa.
He lost his car, no other transportation, no money, no wallet. Basically, his livelihood was in that car. And he said, my life stinks. I know this guy's saved. He used the words, when I talked to him yesterday morning, I'm lost. And not lost spiritually, lost on knowing what to do next and how to save the business. I could just tell the guy was totally overwhelmed. I offered to meet with him Saturday morning. I never can get a hold of the guy even at 10 o'clock in the morning, but he texted me at like before 7 o'clock. He texted me and he's like, Mr. Scott, I didn't sleep a wink last night. I'm ready to meet whenever you can. So, the Lord's testing me in this too. We've had this conversation many times as husband and wife, and sometimes it's like, why are you involved with that person? And it's like, I think it says in the Bible, if you have the ability to help someone that you don't, it's a sin, right? And who did Jesus hang around with? He hung around with people that had the need. He didn't hang around with people just because they were like him, because no one was like him, right? The story I shared with you is real. I don't know what I'm going to do yet, but I am going to help this person in some way. But that's what this challenge is all about, right? It's about changing our hearts, and it's about changing how we go about our lives on a daily basis, and how we see those things that are put in our path, and what we do about them, or what we don't do about them, right? Because sometimes we just don't see it at all. But I can tell you that this lesson series must be working, because I've had many of those moments in the last 2 weeks where I was prompted by the Holy Spirit. And I hope you are too, and I hope everyone in this classroom is. And I'm looking forward to the message today and what comes next in this challenge. Thank you.